Under a sky painted gold by sunset, a German shepherd stands between danger and a miracle. He's more than just a loyal companion. He's the reason a broken family finds hope again. When the truth behind his courage finally comes to light, hearts will change forever. But not every secret is ready to be revealed. What did this brave dog see that night? And why did it change everything? Seattle lay under a wide sheet of rain that moved like silver threads across the night. The streetlights turning every drop into a brief spark before it slipped into the dark. And on Alder Street, the puddles gathered in quiet hollows, holding pale copies of windows and roofs, and the thin glow of porch lamps, while somewhere in the distance, a low rumble spread through the clouds and rolled slowly back as if the city itself breathed. Officer Alex Sullivan pulled his SUV into the driveway and sat for a moment with both hands resting on the wheel. Shoulders heavy from 48 hours of calls and reports and small rescues that never made the news. And beside him, Zeus shifted on the passenger seat. A 5-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat that looked almost bronze in the streetlight, his amber eyes bright and awake. Even at this late hour, his ears tilted toward the house as if he could already hear someone speaking inside. The engine ticked as it cooled, and the rain made a soft patter on the windshield that felt like a slowed heartbeat, and Alex let his eyes rest on the front door. A familiar door, a safe door, the color of mellow wood and clean lines. The kind of door people pass every day without thinking, the kind that usually means warmth in an ordinary night. So he reached down for his bag, gave Zeus a quick scratch behind the ear, and said in a voice made rough by long hours. Homebuddy, and Zeus responded with a small sound in his throat. A sound that carried more than words, the sound of a partner ready to step into whatever waited beyond the glass. When Alex opened the door, and the night air rushed in, the rain touched his face like cool breath, and the smell of wet earth and cedar drifted up from the small shrubs by the porch. And he crossed the short walk in 3 steady steps, the key turning with a clean metallic click, the kind of sound that usually signals peace. And the house welcomed him with a soft hush, a lived-in hush, lemon cleaner lingering in the hall, the faint trace of perfume from earlier in the day. The quiet of walls that have held voices and laughter and ordinary conversations, and for a heartbeat, he let that hush fall over him like a blanket. A small moment of relief, the simple comfort of arrival. Zeus passed the threshold at his heel muscles coiled under rain-specked fur, his paws silent on the hardwood, and as Alex set the bag down, the dog's head lifted the nose, working the body adjusting by a fraction, the kind of movement a person could miss if they were tired. But Alex had learned the language of this dog, the way the back straightened when a scent carried worry, the way the ears leaned forward when a sound mattered, and a line of focus ran through Zeus from nose to tail, a quiet arrow pointing down the hall. The house gave them more silence, the kind that feels wrapped in cotton. And then the air carried a sharper note, something chemical and sweet. A beauty table smell turned thin and edged, and under it very small a sound that reached the bones before it reached the ears. The soft, broken hiccup of a child who has run out of breath and tries to make more. Alex felt the world narrow to a single path, one he knew too well. From dark apartments and late calls, and yet tonight it ran through his own home, which changed everything, and he moved down the hall with a steadiness that came from years of training. Each step placed with care. His breath quiet, his eyes scanning Zeus, gliding at his side like a shadow. With a heartbeat, and the living room light cast a pale rectangle across the floor. He turned the corner, and the scene fixed itself in his mind with a clarity that would never wash out a white carpet bright as winter, a pink stain shaped like a flower that opened where a bottle had fallen. A small hand slick with blood at the tip of a finger where the nail had lifted, and above that hand, Brenda Sullivan kneeling, her hair neat, her robe smooth, her face set with a narrow focus that looked like someone solving a problem. A pair of metal pliers resting in her grip, the kind used for quick household fixes, now held with the wrong kind of purpose. Across the carpet, Leo lay half-turned 7 years old, with the soft lines of a child who still believes in rescue. Cheeks, wet chest, rising too quickly, a small sound leaking through his lips as if he tried to be brave for the sake of the room, and the moment Alex stepped in, the air shifted a string, pulled tight and humming. Zeus moved first the way a river moves when a dam gives way. A sudden grounded surge that filled the space between the child and the metal, his body low and wide, his chest pushing a deep sound that came from a place older than fear, the kind of sound that fills a house with a line that may not be crossed, and everything else became still. Alex's throat felt raw as he took in the details. The way a camera takes in light, the bright drop on the plier's jaw, the tremble running through Leo's elbow. The shape of Brenda's mouth and training slid into place, clean and simple, the kind of order that helps a person breathe when the heart tries to climb out of the ribs, so he put one hand out and said the single word that changes rooms. His voice carrying through the house with a steel edge and a father's weight stop. The sound cracked the air like thunder close to the roof, and time seemed to pause around it. In that pause, the rain outside pressed harder against the windows, and the dog's growl steadied into a presence that felt like a wall. Brenda's eyes lifted to him, wide and bright, the pliers shifting a fraction, her mouth parting as if to explain. But Zeus's gaze pinned the space with an amber line so clear that explanation lost shape in the air. And Alex stepped past the coffee table, slow and sure. One palm shone open, his body turning so he could gather Leo without hiding the boy from the dog's watch. Because Zeus understood work and duty and love like a single thing. And in that understanding, he anchored the room. Leo blinked toward his father, relief and pain mixing in one small breath that sounded like the first sip of air after deep water, and his uninjured hand reached for the fabric of Alex's sleeve, the grip light, but certain a small trust that felt like a bell ringing far away, and also in the center of the chest. Alex knelt, knees meeting the carpet, eyes level with his son's, and he spoke in a voice built for difficult midnights and gentle mornings. The voice he used when Leo scraped a knee or struggled with a puzzle, low and steady. "I'm here," and the boy's shoulders eased just enough that the next breath came cleaner, and Zeus shifted half an inch, placing his weight where it guarded both of them, the curve of his ribs rising and falling like a promise. The pliers slipped from Brenda's hand and touched the carpet with a mild, bright clink, a single sound that seemed to separate what the room had been from what it would be now. And in that small sound the house felt different, as if a window opened, as if the night let go of something. Alex pulled a clean hand towel from the end table drawer, the place where they kept coasters and spare batteries and small useful things. And he wrapped Leo's finger with care that turned the world quiet, the way careful hands always do. The pressure gentle enough to calm, firm enough to help. And when the cloth bloomed, a deeper color, he adjusted without hurry, his breath steady, a tiny rhythm for the boy to match. Leo watched his father's face and drew strength from every line, and when Alex finally slid one arm under the boy's knees and the other behind his back, Leo tucked his cheek against the familiar shape of his shoulder, a small sigh that followed as soft as the beginning of sleep. Zeus rose with them, a clean fluid movement, his tail low. His eyes locked on the path toward the door, and Alex stood with slow power, lifting Leo as if he weighed less than every fear that had filled this room a minute earlier. And he turned toward the hall, the white carpet and the pink stain and the fallen pliers remaining behind like a picture that would stay in a frame, but no longer hold the people inside it. The air in the hallway felt cooler, touched by the draft of rain coming through the seams of the old windows, and the soft drum of water on the porch steps grew clearer, like a guide calling them forward. He moved past the family photos on the wall, the ones taken on bright afternoons, in parks, and on school mornings with backpacks and smiles that made eyes shine, and each frame flashed by with the light from the living room. A strip of memory that followed them toward the front of the house, and Zeus kept a half-pace ahead, now checking corners with a glance, checking shadows with that quick lift of the nose that meant trust and duty were walking together. The doorknob felt cool in Alex's hand, the kind of cool that wakes skin, and when he opened the door, the rain welcomed them. With a soft roar, the porch light catching on a shower of small diamonds, the night turning glittering and alive. Leo tightened his arm around his father's neck for 1 second, and then settled his breath, warm against a collar that carried the day's work, and Zeus stepped out first. Paws meeting the wet boards of the porch, with confidence, head-high ears, tuned to the street as if the block belonged to him, and he had always guarded it. The air smelled like clean pavement, and the leaves of the maple by the curb, and the quiet hum of the city after midnight, wrapped around them steady and deep, and from somewhere over the rooftops, thunder began to travel again, a slow, long roll that crossed Alder Street and kept going until it met the hills beyond. Alex carried Leo down the steps, each step sure, and even the kind of steps a child can feel in their father's chest, and the rain touched the boy's hair and left it darker and shining. And Zeus guided their path along the walkway, pausing at the edge of the yard to scan the dark like a lighthouse with a heartbeat, then angling toward the car with a certainty that warmed the night. Behind them, the front door hung open for a breath and then drifted closed on the familiar spring, and the house stood quiet again, with the shared sound of rain and wind, the living room light still casting its pale rectangle on the floor where the pink stain held the last of the evening. At the curb, a flash of lightning turned the wet street into a strip of polished slate and returned the world to dim silver. And Alex felt the weight of his son adjust in his arms, the way a sleeping child's weight always does. Heavier and somehow easier to carry, and he pressed his cheek briefly to Leo's hair, drew in the scent of rain and little boy and safety, and lifted his eyes to the sky where another rumble gathered its long voice. And in that voice lay a promise of change. Zeus looked back once over his shoulder, a quick check, a measure taken, and then raised his nose to the rain, the outline of his ears sharp against the night, leading them forward with the calm of a guardian who knows the way, while thunder rolled over Alder Street and the next moment waited just beyond the glow of the porch light. The rain followed them all the way to Seattle General Hospital, painting silver streaks on the windows as Alex pushed through the sliding glass doors with Leo in his arms. The light inside hit him like a wave, bright, sterile, unblinking. It carried the smell of antiseptic and something sharper beneath it, something that whispered of fear. His uniform sleeve was still dark with his son's blood. The stain had dried at the edge of the fabric, a quiet reminder of what had happened in that living room. Zeus walked close behind his paws, tapping softly on the tiled floor, tail low but steady. Nurses looked up as they entered. Some froze for a second, not sure whether to move toward the uniformed man or the small boy in his arms. Alex's voice broke the silence low but commanding the way it always did in a crisis. 7-year-old male. Hand injury. Need pediatric care. Now. A nurse hurried forward. Her name tag read, Valerie Brooks. She looked to be in her 40s, her red hair tucked neatly under her cap, her face open and kind, in a way that made people breathe easier. "Follow me," she said, already clearing the way toward the nearest room. Her tone was brisk, but her eyes softened as she looked at Leo, whose head rested against his father's shoulder, lashes clumped from tears and rain. "It's all right, sweetheart. We'll take care of you." Alex laid Leo gently on the hospital bed, the white sheet swallowing the boy's small frame. Zeus positioned himself at the foot of the bed, silent, watchful, a sentinel wrapped in fur. When Nurse Brooks peeled back the towel, her hand slowed. The wound looked fresh and deliberate, clean at the edges, like it hadn't been caught by accident, but pulled. She pressed a button on the wall. "Dr. Holloway, Pediatric Trauma Room 3, she called through the intercom. "Possible domestic injury." Alex's jaw flexed as the nurse cleaned the blood from Leo's skin. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the rain on his clothes making the air sting. Leo winced, trying not to cry. Alex reached for his free hand and squeezed gently. "You're safe, kid. You're safe now," he whispered. His words carried steadiness, but his chest felt like glass ready to crack. The door opened with a soft click, and Dr. Sarah Holloway stepped in. She looked composed, the kind of calm that comes from years of facing what others cannot bear to see. Her blonde hair was tied into a low bun, her pale blue eyes sharp, yet full of patience. There was something in her expression, a memory she carried, but never spoke of, that gave weight to her quiet presence. She slipped on gloves and leaned close to examine Leo's hand. "Tell me what happened, honey," she said softly. Leo's voice came out thin, almost air. "It was an accident," he murmured. "She said it was." Sarah's eyes flickered toward Alex for a second. He stood still, arms crossed, his face unreadable, but his silence heavy. She examined the wound with care, tracing its edge with the gentlest touch. Then she straightened her voice, calm but firm. "This wasn't an accident." The words fell into the room like a verdict. Alex's body tensed, every part of his training pushing against the helplessness rising inside him. He had walked into countless homes like this, heard the same quiet denials, seen the same injuries. But this time the evidence was on his own child's skin. His badge meant nothing here. His father's heart meant everything. Nurse Brooks caught the look in his eyes and placed a steadying hand on his arm. "We'll treat him, officer. He's in good hands." She moved with efficiency, bandages, antiseptic soft gauze, and all the while Dr. Holloway worked in silence. Her expression careful, focused, professional. The kind of care that holds emotion inside because the moment demands clarity. Zeus lifted his head when Leo whimpered. The dog's eyes followed every motion near the boy's hand. When the nurse stepped back to prepare an IV, Zeus lowered his head again, resting it on the edge of the bed as if offering reassurance in his own way. The steady rhythm of his breathing filled the quiet between heart monitors and rain against glass. Sarah glanced up from her notes. "We'll have to file this," she said gently. "Child Protective Services will need the report by morning." Alex nodded without looking away from his son. "Do it," he said simply. "I'll give my statement." Leo blinked up at him, tears pooling again. "Dad," he whispered, "am I in trouble?" Alex's heart clenched. He bent closer, brushing his thumb against the boy's cheek. "No, son. You did nothing wrong. You're brave." The boy's lip trembled, then steadied. Zeus made a small sound, half sigh, half hum, as if agreeing. For a few minutes, the only sound in the room was the quiet murmur of hospital machines. The harsh white lights reflected in the puddles outside, turning the windows into moving mirrors. Every few seconds, lightning flickered faintly through the mist, and the thunder came softer now, tired as if the storm had spent its rage and was ready to rest. Dr. Holloway finished writing her report and turned toward Alex. "He'll need a few stitches and some rest. But physically he'll be okay," she said. Then her tone softened. "Emotionally, he'll need time." Alex nodded, voice rough. "We'll take all the time he needs." Valerie Brooks returned with fresh bandages and a cup of warm water. She smiled at Leo, the kind of smile that makes a hospital room feel a little less like a battlefield. "See, that's not so bad. You've got yourself a brave soldier there," she said to Alex. He managed a small smile. "He's got good company," he replied, glancing at Zeus. The German shepherd wagged his tail, once a soft thump against the tile. The boy's eyes began to droop as the medication eased in. His breathing steadied his body, finally giving in to exhaustion. Alex brushed damp hair from his forehead. "Sleep, buddy. I've got you." Dr. Holloway dimmed the lights a little, leaving the room in a softer glow. "You can stay with him tonight," she said quietly. "He shouldn't be alone." Alex sat down beside the bed. "We won't leave him. he murmured, glancing at Zeus, who had already settled at Leo's side like a shadow that refused to move. Hours stretched quietly. Nurses passed by the open door, their shoes whispering against the floor. Each time Alex looked at the bandaged hand resting on the blanket, he felt the promise forming inside him, like steel. No one would ever hurt this child again. He watched Leo's chest rise and fall, steady now, each breath pushing back the chaos that had filled their house. The rain outside began to soften, turning from a downpour to a gentle mist. It slid down the windows, like tears finding their way home. In that quiet rhythm, Alex found a strange kind of calm. The storm was still out there, but inside the room, something else began, a fragile, stubborn peace. Dr. Holloway stepped out for a moment, leaving her clipboard on the counter. On the top page, her neat handwriting read, "Injury consistent with external force. Confirmed non-accidental trauma." The words burned into Alex's mind. He had seen hundreds of such reports in his career. Now one of them carried his son's name. He reached out and rested his hand lightly on Zeus's back. The dog's muscles relaxed under his palm. "Good job, partner," Alex whispered. "You saved him." Zeus turned his head slightly, meeting his eyes, and for a moment, Alex felt that the dog understood everything. The hospital lights still glowed harsh and white, but they no longer felt cold. They were the kind of lights that hold people awake through the worst hours and still promise that morning will come. Outside, the rain began to ease. Inside, a father sat beside his sleeping child and swore not aloud, but deep in his bones, that the world would have to break through him before it ever reached his son again. Somewhere beyond the window, thunder rolled one last time, low and fading like a closing door. The night pressed close around the downtown precinct, the kind of heavy darkness that only comes after long rain. The parking lot shimmered under the yellow glow of the streetlights, and puddles reflected the spinning red and blue from a few patrol cars still on duty. Inside, the air smelled of old coffee-damp uniforms and the steady hum of computers. Officer Alex Sullivan sat at his desk, his posture rigid, his eyes burning with exhaustion that felt older than the day. The clock on the wall said 12:47 a.m. He hadn't slept in nearly 2 days. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, shaking slightly as he began to type. "Report possible child abuse. Minor Leo Sullivan." The words looked foreign on the screen, clinical and cold, stripped of everything he had felt holding his son in the rain. He paused, the blinking cursor tapping like a pulse, steady and cruel. Each letter pulled another thread of memory, the white carpet, the pliers, the sound of his son's sob. His throat tightened, but he forced himself to continue. Duty demanded precision, even when the heart wanted mercy. Across the room, the late shift lights cast a pale shine over the desks. Most of the precinct slept in its own kind of silence. Only a few officers moved through the hall, their voices low. The city was quieter now, but Alex felt the noise still inside him, the clash of rage and helplessness that refused to settle. A soft knock broke his focus. Sergeant Linda Hayes stood in the doorway, her auburn hair tied back, her uniform slightly wrinkled. She carried a cup of black coffee and the calm steadiness that came from years on the force. "You're still writing?" she asked. "Can't stop now," Alex replied, eyes on the screen. His voice sounded distant, hollow. Linda walked closer, setting the coffee near his elbow. "You've been through hell tonight. Take a breath before it takes you." He gave a small nod, but his jaw stayed tight. She studied him for a moment, then glanced toward the glass room at the end of the hallway where Riley Jensen, a young caseworker from Victim Services, stood with Leo and Zeus. Riley looked barely 30, dressed in a gray cardigan and jeans, under her security badge. Her voice carried the soft tone of someone used to speaking to frightened children. She was kneeling beside Leo now, showing him a blanket and a tray of snacks from the vending machine. The small safe room glowed warmly under a lamp. The walls were painted pale yellow instead of gray, like the rest of the precinct. Zeus lay curled on the rug beside the couch, his head resting near Leo's knee. Every time the boy shifted, the dog lifted his head slightly, then settled again. It was a quiet picture, a pocket of peace in a night that had none. Linda followed Alex's gaze. He's safe. Let her handle it. Alex leaned back, rubbing his temples. He shouldn't have to be here. He should be asleep in his own bed, not in a station room. Linda crossed her arms. He's here because you did what you had to do. Her words landed with truth, but no comfort. When she walked away, Alex turned back to the monitor. The report still waited half-written. He added a few more lines: time of incident, visible injuries, evidence secured. His training made it easy to list facts. It was harder to live inside them. When the report was done, he opened the precinct's internal database to attach photographic evidence. His eyes skimmed the screen automatically until something made him stop. A small note in the system log caught his attention. Recent access 11:27 p.m. Home IP address. He frowned. That was impossible. At 11:27, he had been on patrol responding to a welfare call in Westlake. He clicked deeper into the access records, the way an instinct draws a cop toward a faint clue. The records confirmed it. His credentials had been used to log in remotely, not once but 3 times in the past week. The access matched his home network ID. Files had been viewed, some even deleted. A chill climbed through him. He opened the list of affected files. One name stood out like a wound, reopening case 2134. Shane Calder. Alex's heartbeat stuttered. That was the case he had spent months building, the one that disappeared suddenly 2 weeks ago, marked closed due to insufficient evidence. Calder was a high-level fraud suspect tied to several identity theft rings. Alex had never closed that case. Someone had done it under his badge. He leaned closer to the screen, scrolling through the details. Every log carried his ID, his signature, but the timestamps fell right in the middle of his patrol shifts. Someone inside his house had used his credentials. He pushed back from the desk chair wheels, scraping against the floor. His mind replayed Brenda's voice from earlier in the night, her trembling words, her panic, her claim that he would regret everything. And behind that panic, the flicker of fear that didn't belong to guilt alone. It was the fear of exposure. Alex opened the system's trace function, cross-checking the IP against his home router. The address matched perfectly. The reality hit him with quiet violence. Brenda had access to his laptop. He had given it to her months ago for tax forms. She had the Wi-Fi password, his badge number saved from a work document, everything she would need. He stared at the screen, the truth forming in slow, heavy lines. Brenda hadn't just hurt Leo. She had crossed into something darker, something deliberate. Maybe Calder wasn't gone at all. Maybe she had been helping him. From across the room, Riley stepped out of the safe room, closing the door gently behind her. She walked toward Alex, holding a folder. "Leo's asleep," she said softly. "Zeus hasn't moved an inch. He's guarding him." Alex nodded, voice low. "That's what he does." Riley hesitated, watching his face. "You look like you just found something you didn't want to find." He didn't answer right away. "You ever feel," he said slowly, "like the truth gets worse the closer you look?" She gave a small, sad smile. "All the time." When she left, Alex turned back to the monitor, his reflection faint in the dark glass. His own eyes looked unfamiliar, tired, but burning. He downloaded the access log and saved it to a private drive. Evidence, proof. And somewhere deep beneath the exhaustion, the instincts of a cop began to rise again. The room felt colder now, the hum of the fluorescent lights louder. He could hear the rain outside, softer than before, but steady drumming against the glass. He opened a blank notepad and typed a single line for himself. If she touched Calder's file, she's hiding something bigger. His jaw tightened as he stared at the sentence. The silence stretched until he could hear his own pulse in his ears. Then, from behind the glass wall, Zeus lifted his head as if sensing the storm inside his partner's thoughts. Alex's eyes drifted toward the safe room again. Leo lay on the couch under the blanket Riley had given him. The dog's shadow stretched across the floor beside him, still and patient. For the first time in hours, Alex exhaled slowly. The night had stopped feeling endless. It had turned into something else, a long, deliberate waiting. He saved the file, locked his screen, and whispered to himself in the empty room. "All right, Brenda. Let's see what you've done." Outside, the rain picked up again, tapping softly against the window panes, as if echoing the quiet rhythm of resolve. Somewhere far down the corridor, a phone rang, and the precinct returned to its quiet work. The clock on the wall ticked toward morning, and Alex, alone at his desk, stared into the dark screen that now held the first shadow of truth. The precinct was quiet now. The hum of computers and the soft rhythm of rain against the windows filled the empty halls. Alex sat in front of his screen, the bluish glow washing over his tired face. The clock showed 2:13 a.m. He hadn't moved in an hour. He wasn't just tired, he was awake in a way that burned a mix of duty, disbelief, and something close to heartbreak. He opened the system archives, diving deeper into the records he had already checked. Every click echoed through the silence. The database held thousands of entries, old cases, reports, photos, and digital logs. But somewhere in this ocean of data was the trail of whoever had used his badge to delete a file that wasn't supposed to vanish. He typed quickly, tracing the path of the deleted case file, Case 2134, Shane Calder, a name that brought a low, familiar tension to his chest. Calder had been a ghost in the system for months, slipping through investigations with clever lies and digital footprints that always disappeared a step too soon. Alex had chased him across different districts. Then suddenly the file was marked closed. No notice, no authorization, just gone. Now the pieces were falling into place. Lines of data appeared pale green against the dark screen. He scrolled through timestamps, each one a breadcrumb of betrayal. Access granted Officer Sullivan, 4291. Home IP 192.168.1.6. The same signature, the same timestamps, right when he was logged in on patrol across the city. Someone at his house had entered the system pretending to be him. He opened the recovery logs, eyes scanning fast. Forensic remnants flickered across the screen, partial file names, fragments of metadata. Then something froze him in place. Recovered contact, Brenda Sullivan, personal cell. Her name sat there like a bruise. He clicked to expand the entry. The file showed a list of Calder's recent communications, phone numbers, linked to financial transfers, hidden accounts. Brenda's number was 5th on the list, and the last call between them had happened 2 nights before Alex's shift that ended with Leo bleeding on the carpet. The cursor blinked. The realization landed heavy. While he had been out protecting strangers, his wife had been using his credentials to protect a criminal. Alex leaned back slowly, eyes fixed on the screen. The faint buzz of a fluorescent light filled the room. Outside, the rain had softened to a whisper. His hands were steady, but inside, everything shook. He opened a secured channel and typed, "To Marcus Hale, Internal Affairs, need you at the precinct. Urgent system breach confirmed." Then he sat in silence, staring at the faint reflection of himself in the dark monitor glass. His own eyes looked older than they had a day ago. 20 minutes later, the sound of firm, measured footsteps echoed down the hall. Marcus Hale appeared in the doorway, dressed in a charcoal suit, the kind of man who never seemed surprised by anything. He was in his mid-40s, tall, clean-shaven eyes, sharp and calm. Alex, he greeted quietly, closing the door behind him. "You said urgent." Alex gestured toward the screen. See for yourself. Hale stepped closer, leaning over his shoulder. He scanned the logs, his movements unhurried but exact. His brow furrowed slightly as the patterns revealed themselves: multiple unauthorized logins, deleted files, credentials used remotely. The evidence was clear. After a long pause, Hale straightened. You realize what she's done, Alex? The words hit harder than Alex expected. He nodded once, the motion small but final. Yeah, it's not just a family mess anymore. It's a federal breach. Hale exhaled slowly. We'll have to secure these logs immediately. Internal Affairs will open a full inquiry. If your credentials were used for data deletion connected to Calder, this touches the Bureau. You'll be questioned too. I know. Alex's voice was calm. Just keep Leo out of it. Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded. Understood. They worked side by side for the next hour, exporting the logs, sealing them with encrypted tags. The two men spoke little. Hale's focus was clinical, detached. Alex's was personal, every keystroke a wound being reopened. At one point, Hale said quietly, "You trusted her." Alex didn't look up. She knew everything about my work, my passwords, my routines. She said it made her feel part of my world. He gave a small, bitter laugh. I thought that was love. The older man didn't answer. He just placed a flash drive on the desk and said, "Copy everything here. I'll take it to IA." When Hale left, Alex sat in the stillness for a while, the faint smell of coffee and ozone lingering in the air. The screen now showed the last recovered data, a snapshot of Calder's messages. One stood out. If the files go through, we're clean. He'll never notice. I'll handle the kid. B. The letters blurred for a moment before Alex blinked hard. He saved the evidence, closed the file, and sat back in the chair. The phrase repeated in his mind. I'll handle the kid. So that was it. Leo must have seen something, overheard a call, asked the wrong question. Brenda had panicked. Fear had turned into violence. Alex pressed his palms against his eyes, the edges of fatigue cutting through him. For the first time, he understood that everything connected: the child's tears, the missing file, the fake calm in Brenda's voice. It was one long thread, and now he had it in his hands. He stood and crossed to the window. Through the narrow glass wall, he could see the safe room at the end of the corridor. Inside, the small lamp still glowed golden against the dim halls. Leo lay asleep on the couch, wrapped in a gray blanket. Zeus was curled up beside him, head resting near the boy's feet. The rise and fall of their breathing created a rhythm that looked almost sacred. Even in sleep, Zeus kept one paw touching Leo's arm, a silent vow that nothing would come close again. Alex watched them for a long time. The tension in his body began to ease, not because the danger was over, but because he had a direction now. He finally knew where the truth lived, and that meant he could fight for it. The boy stirred in his sleep. His lips moved faintly, shaping a single word, barely audible through the glass. Home. The sound caught Alex like a small light breaking through the dark. He pressed his hand against the window, palm flat, as if he could touch that word. For a long moment he stood there, rain streaking the glass behind him, the city humming quietly beyond. One day, kid, he whispered, voice rough but sure. We'll make that word mean something again. He turned back to his desk, shutting down the system one file at a time. The screen went black, leaving his reflection in the dark glass, tired but alive with purpose. Outside, dawn had not yet come, but a faint gray line had started to form at the edge of the city skyline. The long night was ending, and somewhere deep inside, a promise had already begun. The first light of dawn crept through the blinds of the precinct conference room, turning the glass walls pale gold. The city outside was still half asleep, the streets washed clean by the long night of rain. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of stale coffee and paper. Captain Nathan Cole stood at the head of the table, tall and composed, his uniform, neat, his gray eyes calm but unreadable. Across from him sat Alex Sullivan, shoulders straight but eyes dimmed by exhaustion. And beside him, Marcus Hale from Internal Affairs, holding a sealed evidence folder. The hum of the air vent was the only sound for a long moment. Alex, Captain Cole began, his tone steady. "We've reviewed your report and Hale's findings. The evidence confirms a serious breach of the police network, one connected to your credentials. Until the investigation is complete, I have to place you on temporary suspension." The words fell quietly, but they hit hard. Alex's stomach tightened, though he had expected this. "I understand," he said. His voice didn't shake. It was flat, almost calm, the calm that comes after the worst has already happened. Cole nodded once. "This isn't punishment. It's protocol. You've done the right thing by reporting it yourself. But we can't risk the case being questioned later." Marcus added softly, "We'll handle it, Alex. The truth will show itself." Alex looked down at the items on the table, his badge and his service pistol. The metal caught the faint morning light, glinting cold and final. He reached for them slowly. The sound of the badge striking the wood echoed through the quiet room, a sharp metallic note that felt like the end of something sacred. He laid the gun beside it, his movements deliberate, respectful, almost ritualistic. For a long moment his hand lingered near the badge. The uniform had been part of him for years. It wasn't just fabric or authority, it was purpose. Now stripped of it, he felt bare, as if he were stepping out of an identity he had lived inside too long. Captain Cole watched him with the expression of a man who had done this before and hated it every time. "Go home, Alex," he said quietly. "Be with your boy. We'll call when we need you." Alex gave a slow nod and rose. "Thank you, sir." Outside, the sunlight had begun to spill over the city. The storm had passed, leaving the streets shining and still. As he walked through the parking lot with Marcus, the world looked different too. Bright, too ordinary for what he felt. Marcus stopped near his car. "You'll hear from me in a day or two. Keep your phone close." "I will," Alex said. "And Marcus, thank you." Hale nodded. "Take care of Leo, the rest will follow." Then he drove off, leaving Alex alone in the early morning quiet. By the time Alex reached Alder Street, the neighborhood was bathed in soft gold light. The rain had washed every roof clean, and puddles mirrored the sky. The Sullivan house stood still, and silent curtains-drawn shadows gathered behind the glass. It looked the same as always, and yet nothing about it felt like home anymore. He didn't go inside. Instead, he crossed the street to the small white cottage next door, the one that had always smelled of fresh bread and cinnamon. Mrs. Evelyn Gable, their elderly neighbor, opened the door even before he could knock. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, her robe tied around her small frame. Her face carried that kind of warmth that makes even bad mornings softer. "Oh, Alex," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I saw the lights last night. Is Leo all right? He's—" "Getting better," Alex answered. He gave a tired smile. "Can we come in for a bit?" "Of course, dear." She stepped aside immediately. "And that brave dog, too." The moment they entered the house felt like an exhale. It was warm, filled with the smell of cinnamon rolls, baking, and old wood polished with care. Leo blinked in the soft light, still pale but calmer than the night before. Zeus walked beside him, tail wagging slowly, the picture of quiet loyalty. Mrs. Gable fussed over them, with gentle hands, setting down towels, pouring tea for Alex, and hot cocoa for Leo. She spoke in the soft rhythm of kindness, never pushing for details. But her eyes, sharp and kind, missed nothing. "I knew something was wrong," she said finally, her voice low. "I heard the shouting more than once." And that woman, Brenda, she always looked at you like she was hiding a storm. Alex looked down into his cup, steam curling upward. You saw more than I did, it seems, he murmured. Mrs. Gable sighed, the kind of sigh that carries the weight of age and wisdom. Evil doesn't always look like a stranger, Alex. Sometimes it sits at your own table and smiles. Leo leaned against Zeus on the rug, stroking his fur with his small bandaged hand. The dog's eyes were half closed, content and protective. The quiet scene steadied Alex more than anything else could. For the first time in many hours, he felt something close to peace. The warmth of the room, the smell of cinnamon, the faint hum of the kettle, all of it built a fragile safety around them. Then came a sound that shattered it. A car door slammed outside. The noise cracked through the stillness like thunder returning after silence. Alex's body reacted before his mind caught up. He set his cup down and rose, crossing the room to the window. Through the lace curtain, he saw a white sedan pulling up in front of his house. The driver's door swung open. Brenda. She stepped out, her hair unkempt, clothes, wrinkled face pale and drawn. Her eyes darted toward the house across the street, the one he was standing in now. Mrs. Gable's breath caught. Good heavens. Alex's pulse began to race. The court order from the night before, she was forbidden to come near them, not until the investigation closed. Brenda stood in the street for a moment, looking lost, then angry, then desperate. She started toward the house, her steps quick and uneven, the morning light catching on the streaks of tears down her face. Zeus lifted his head, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Leo looked up, sensing something shift. Alex turned to Mrs. Gable, voice low but firm. Stay inside. Lock the door behind me. She nodded, her hands trembling slightly. Be careful, Alex. He stepped out onto the porch, the air sharp with the clean scent of rain and the tension of what was coming. The sun had climbed higher now, casting long shadows across Alder Street. Brenda froze halfway up the path, eyes wide as she saw him standing there. Her lips parted, forming words he couldn't hear yet. But her expression said everything. Fear, anger, and a kind of sorrow twisted together. Behind him, through the open doorway, Zeus stood poised at the threshold, eyes locked on her, waiting for his cue. The morning that had started in quiet truth now stood on the edge of another storm. Alex took one step forward, his voice steady and low. You shouldn't be here, Brenda. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and the sound of her ragged breathing. In that instant, the house of secrets stood between what was lost and what was about to break open again. Rain gathered in the driveway like thin mirrors catching the gray morning sky. Drops slid from the porch roof and landed with a steady rhythm that made the air feel both calm and tense. Alex stood at the edge of Mrs. Gable's porch, his jacket damp from the mist, watching Brenda step out of her white sedan. Her movements were restless, jerky, as if every step pulled her closer to something she couldn't control anymore. Her hair clung to her face, and her eyes darted between him and the house behind him. Alex, please, she said, her voice cracking. You're misunderstanding everything. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Alex's stance didn't change. He stood firm, shoulders squared, rainwater sliding down his collar. You shouldn't be here, Brenda. There's a court order. She took another step forward, hands shaking. I did it for us, she pleaded. For you, for Leo. I was trying to fix what was broken. Shane promised he could make things right. He said if I helped him, we'd be free, free of debt, free of pressure. Her tone softened, twisting into something that almost sounded sincere. I did it for this family. Alex's jaw tightened. For this family, he repeated quietly. You hurt our son. You used my badge. You erased a case tied to a federal investigation. That's not fixing anything, that's destroying it. Brenda's face shifted, her expression trembling between guilt and defiance. The rain came harder now, tapping against the car roof behind her. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "You were never here, Alex. You were always married to the job, not to me. Everything fell apart because you left me alone in that house." Alex took one step closer, his voice calm but firm. "Turn around, Brenda. You're under investigation. Don't make this worse." Her eyes flashed. "Worse," she shouted, her words trembling. "I did what I had to do. Shane was the only one who listened. He said if I helped him, he'd clear your name too. Do you think I wanted this?" Her hands clenched into fists. "I did it for you." The desperation in her voice hung heavy in the air. For a brief moment, her mask cracked just long enough for the truth to show through. Then her tone changed again, sharp and cold. "You'll lose everything, Alex. The department will believe me before they believe you. I'll tell them you're unstable, that you hit me, that you've lost control." Alex didn't flinch, but the words cut deep. He had heard countless lies in his career, but none hurt like the ones spoken by someone who once shared his bed. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Tell them. The truth will still stand when your stories fall apart." Zeus, standing just behind Alex, sensed the shift in the air. His body went tense, muscles tight beneath his soaked fur. A low growl rolled from his chest, deep and warning. His amber eyes stayed locked on Brenda, reading every movement. Brenda took an uneasy step back. Her voice trembled, part anger, part fear. "You'd use that animal against me now." Alex's tone didn't change. "He protects those who need it. Right now, that's not you." The front door opened behind him, and Mrs. Evelyn Gable stepped out, holding her phone tightly in both hands. Her voice was steady, though her fingers shook. "I'm calling the police," she said loudly enough for Brenda to hear. "You're not supposed to be here." Brenda's eyes widened, panic breaking through her anger. She looked from Alex to the phone, then toward the end of the street. The sound of distant sirens began to rise, faint but growing an echo from somewhere beyond the rain. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, this isn't how it ends." She turned suddenly, splashing through the puddles as she ran toward her car. Her movements were frantic, driven by fear more than reason. She fumbled with the door handle, slipped once, then threw herself into the driver's seat. Brenda, Alex called out, but she didn't stop. The car engine roared to life, tires spinning against the wet pavement before finding traction. The white sedan lurched forward and disappeared down the street, taillights blurring through the rain like fading fire. The sirens grew closer, their sound bouncing off the houses of Alder Street. Alex stood in the rain for a moment, breathing deeply, watching the road where she had vanished. His hands felt cold, but his heart was steady. Mrs. Gable lowered her phone slowly. "They're on their way," she said softly. "Are you all right?" He nodded once. "Yeah, just tired." She gave him a look filled with quiet understanding. "You've done enough for tonight, Alex. Go inside." He turned back toward her house. Through the front window, the warm glow of the living room spilled onto the wet porch. Inside, Leo sat curled on the couch, the blanket around his shoulders, eyes wide. When he saw his father, he ran forward, small feet hitting the rug, and wrapped his arms around Alex's waist. Alex knelt, pulling him close, feeling the small heartbeat pressed against his chest. "It's over, buddy," he whispered, though he knew it wasn't truly over yet. "You're safe." Zeus came closer, pressing his head against them both, his fur damp and warm. The dog's steady breathing filled the room, the sound grounding them in something real. Leo looked up, voice small. "Is she gone?" Alex nodded. "She's gone." Outside, red and blue lights began to flash faintly through the rain, reflecting off the windows. Officers moved down the street, their radios crackling. But inside, the world had gone quiet again, only the soft hum of the kettle and the whisper of the rain remained. Alex rested a hand on Zeus's neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath the fur. "Good boy," he murmured. For the first time in days, his body began to unclench. The storm outside could rage as much as it wanted. Inside, he could finally breathe. He looked down at his son, who was already half asleep against his chest, and at the loyal dog resting beside them. For now, that was enough. Somewhere beyond the rain, the sirens faded into distance, leaving behind only the calm that comes after chaos, the fragile, trembling peace that begins when survival turns into healing. The courthouse stood tall and gray against a soft mist that floated above the city. The stone steps were damp from early rain, glistening faintly under the pale light of morning. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper, old wood, and tension. The halls were quiet except for the slow rhythm of footsteps and the low murmur of voices waiting for justice to be spoken aloud. Alex Sullivan walked beside his attorney, Lisa Park, through the echoing corridor that led to courtroom 3B. He was wearing a plain gray suit instead of his police uniform, but his posture carried the same discipline. Each step felt heavy, not from fear, but from the weight of what was at stake: his son, his name, and the truth. Lisa walked with calm precision, her expression thoughtful, her dark hair pulled neatly behind her shoulders. She was known for her steady voice and sharp empathy, the kind of lawyer who could balance reason with compassion. She spoke softly as they approached the courtroom door. "Stay calm, Alex. Let the truth speak for itself. The evidence is strong." "I trust you," he said quietly. Inside, the courtroom was cool and solemn. The walls were lined with tall windows, their glass slightly fogged from the morning mist. Wooden benches filled the space, polished smooth from years of stories like his. At the front sat Judge Margaret Reeves, silver-haired and composed, her presence commanding, but not harsh. She adjusted her glasses, looked over the files before her, and nodded for the clerk to begin. To Alex's right, Brenda Sullivan sat beside her attorney, Thomas Reed. She looked perfect, hairstyled, a dress, pressed makeup, soft and measured. To anyone else, she might have seemed calm, even delicate. But Alex knew that look. It was the same mask she wore when she wanted the world to see her as the victim. Thomas Reed leaned close to her, whispering something before turning his sharp eyes toward Lisa and Alex. He was younger than most expected, confident and quick with words, a man who thrived in the gray areas of truth. The bailiff's voice broke the silence. "All rise." Everyone stood as Judge Reeves entered fully. Her tone was firm, her voice clear. "Please be seated. This court is now in session for the matter of custody and criminal review concerning the Sullivan family." Alex exhaled slowly as he sat. Across the aisle, Brenda crossed her legs neatly, her hands clasped in her lap. The faint sound of her jewelry clicked when she moved, a rhythm too calm for the storm underneath. Lisa stood first, opening her case file. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady but compassionate, "we present clear evidence of child endangerment, physical harm, and obstruction of justice involving the defendant, Mrs. Brenda Sullivan. The victim, Leo Sullivan, age 7, sustained deliberate injury to his hand. Medical reports confirm it was caused by an external tool pliers administered intentionally." Judge Reeves nodded. "Proceed." Lisa handed copies of the hospital records to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. The faint sound of paper sliding against wood filled the room. This report, Lisa continued, prepared by Dr. Sarah Holloway of Seattle General Hospital, documents injuries inconsistent with accident. Additionally, Child Protective Services filed an immediate protective order following the initial report. Thomas Reed rose smoothly. "Objection, Your Honor. The opposing counsel is presenting hearsay before foundation has been established." Lisa didn't flinch. "All supporting witnesses are available for testimony, and the records are entered as exhibits. These documents come directly from primary sources." "Objection overruled," Judge Reeves said without hesitation. "Continue, Ms. Park." Lisa gave a small nod. "Thank you, Your Honor." She turned slightly toward Alex's table, lowering her tone. "The evidence extends beyond physical harm. It includes deliberate interference in an ongoing federal investigation." The courtroom grew quieter. Even the sound of rain outside seemed to pause. Lisa clicked her remote, and the screen beside the judge lit up with the recovered data logs. Internal Affairs traced multiple unauthorized logins to Officer Sullivan's account, she explained. These occurred during hours when Officer Sullivan was documented on duty. The logins originated from his home IP address, where Mrs. Sullivan had full access to his personal computer. She pointed to the screen where highlighted lines showed the deleted case. The erased file, Case 2134, belongs to an active federal fraud investigation tied to a suspect named Shane Calder. Evidence recovered from backup servers shows Mrs. Sullivan's phone number and financial information linked directly to Calder's communications. Judge Reeves leaned forward slightly, studying the data. "And this information was confirmed by Internal Affairs. Yes, Your Honor," Lisa replied. Investigator Marcus Hale personally reviewed and signed off on the chain of evidence. "The full report is here." Thomas Reed stood again, his tone sharper now. "Your Honor, this narrative paints my client as a criminal mastermind, when in reality she's a wife under extreme emotional pressure." Officer Sullivan himself admitted to long absences and overwhelming stress at work. Mrs. Sullivan acted out of desperation, not intent. She was manipulated by others, by Calder, and now her husband, driven by guilt and exhaustion, seeks to punish her instead of understanding her. His words carried practiced emotion, each sentence carefully shaped for sympathy. He turned toward the judge with an open hand. "What we have here isn't malice. It's a family torn apart by neglect, fear, and misunderstanding." Lisa rose again before the echo of his words faded. Her voice was calm but clear, every syllable cutting through the air. "Desperation doesn't erase accountability. The evidence isn't emotion, it's fact. Hospital records don't lie. System logs don't lie. And a child's wound isn't the result of fear. It's the result of a choice." Thomas looked ready to object, but the judge lifted her hand. "That's enough, both of you." Her tone was even, but her eyes held weight. "I've heard the arguments. I'll review the records carefully." The courtroom fell quiet again. The only sounds were the faint rustle of papers and the distant drip of water from someone's umbrella. Brenda shifted in her seat, her calm starting to crack. For the first time that morning, she looked less like a picture of composure and more like someone cornered. Her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve. Judge Reeves adjusted her glasses, her gaze steady on the defendant. "Mrs. Sullivan, you will have the opportunity to testify, but this court will not mistake performance for truth. Evidence will guide my decision, not appearances." Brenda swallowed, nodding faintly, her lips pressed tight. Lisa closed her file and took her seat beside Alex. He hadn't spoken since the hearing began, but his eyes stayed fixed on the table, his hand clenched around a pen that hadn't moved. Lisa leaned slightly toward him, whispering, "She's losing control. Keep steady. We're almost there." Outside, the mist had thickened, turning the courthouse windows into pale gray sheets of glass. Inside, the quiet tension held like breath before thunder. Judge Reeves reviewed the documents one last time, her expression unreadable. When she finally looked up, her voice was measured but firm. "We'll reconvene tomorrow morning for witness testimony. Until then, court is adjourned." The gavel struck once sharp, final echoing through the room. As people began to rise, Alex caught a glimpse of Brenda across the aisle. The mask of calm had returned, but her eyes told another story, a flicker of panic behind the polish. He turned away, following Lisa toward the door. The courthouse felt colder now, heavier, but he walked taller than when he had entered. Justice was slow, but it was moving. And And somewhere in that slow march, truth had already started to find its way through the fog. The next morning, the courtroom filled with a quiet kind of tension, the kind that hums just below the surface, steady and alive. Light filtered through the tall windows, spreading across polished wood and faces waiting to speak. Judge Margaret Reeves took her seat, eyes calm, hands folded neatly before her. "Call the first witness," she said. Grace Holloway. Leo's teacher stepped forward. She was young, with tired eyes that still held warmth. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the oath, but her voice stayed clear. "I've taught Leo for nearly 2 years," she began. "He's a bright boy, kind, gentle, always trying to help. But a few months ago, I noticed changes. He came to class exhausted. He'd stare at the floor instead of talking to his friends. When I asked what was wrong, he said, 'Mom doesn't like messes.'" Grace paused, her gaze soft but pained. "At first I thought it meant toys or his schoolwork. But then he stopped using colors in art class. Every drawing was gray or brown. When I asked why, he said it was safer that way." The words hung in the courtroom. Even the sound of pens stopped. Lisa Park nodded gently. "Thank you, Ms. Holloway. No further questions?" Thomas Reed, Brenda's lawyer, stood and adjusted his tie. "Ms. Holloway, you care about your students, don't you?" "Of course. And sometimes children, especially sensitive ones, say things they don't mean correct." Grace met his gaze steadily. "Children tell the truth when they feel safe enough to do it. That's what Leo did." A ripple of quiet moved through the room. Judge Reeves gave a single nod. "Next witness." Mrs. Evelyn Gable entered slowly, leaning on her cane. Her presence was small but strong, her silver hair pinned neatly. She looked straight at Brenda as she took the stand. "I've lived next door to the Sullivans for 10 years, she began. "I've heard laughter from that house, but lately it was only silence and sometimes cries." Lisa spoke softly. "What kind of cries, Mrs. Gable?" She swallowed. "A child's. At night, mostly. There were evenings when I saw Leo sitting on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, even when the wind was cold. Once I brought him cocoa, but Brenda came out before I reached him and told me to mind my business." Thomas stood sharply. "Objection, Your Honor. Speculation and personal bias. The witness is assuming intent." Lisa turned toward the judge. "The witness is recounting direct observation. It speaks to pattern and neglect." Judge Reeves's tone was calm but final. "Objection overruled. Continue." Mrs. Gable took a breath, her eyes never leaving Brenda. "You can call it whatever you want, but I know what I heard. That boy was scared." She looked toward Alex briefly, her expression softening. "He's safe now. That's what matters." When Mrs. Gable stepped down, Lisa Park walked back to her table and opened a folder. She placed a set of medical photos on the desk before the judge's small hands, bruised edges, cuts in straight, deliberate lines. "These are not accidents," Lisa said quietly. "They show control. They show intent." Thomas didn't rise this time. He simply looked down his pen, motionless. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window panes, as if echoing the slow rhythm of truth taking shape inside. At the back of the courtroom, Zeus waited in the hallway beside Leo, his body still, his eyes fixed on the door. The boy leaned against him, calm but alert, sensing that something important was happening just beyond the wall. When the last word was spoken, Lisa closed her folder and faced the judge. "The prosecution rests, Your Honor." The silence that followed was deep and certain. The storm had shifted, and in its wake, truth now stood unshaken. The courtroom was silent when the bailiff opened the side door. The faint squeak of the hinges broke the stillness, and every head turned. Leo Sullivan stepped in, small and solemn, holding Zeus's leash in his uninjured hand. The German shepherd walked beside him, with calm certainty, guiding him forward like a guardian who already knew the way. The boy's shoes tapped softly against the wooden floor until he stopped before the witness stand. Judge Margaret Reeves watched him gently. Her eyes, usually sharp and focused, softened as she spoke. "Hello, Leo," she said kindly. "Do you know why you're here today?" Leo nodded, his voice quiet but sure. "To tell the truth." His words carried through the room, light yet powerful. Even the sound of rain outside seemed to fade. "Good," the judge said, her tone warm. "That's the best reason to be here." Lisa Park gave him an encouraging smile from the table. Across the aisle, Brenda Sullivan shifted her hands, gripping the edge of her chair. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't seem to hear. Judge Reeves nodded toward Leo. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Take your time." Leo looked down for a moment, his small fingers brushing the leash. Zeus sat beside him, perfectly still, eyes bright and steady. Then Leo lifted his bandaged hand slightly, the gauze wrapped neat but visible. "It hurts," he said softly. "I don't want her to use the pliers again." The words landed like a stone dropped into deep water, quiet at first, then spreading in ripples that reached every corner of the room. Brenda's face went pale. She tried to speak, her voice catching. "That's not..." But Leo looked straight at her. His eyes filled not with anger, but with something older: disappointment, sadness, truth. He didn't need to shout. The silence around him spoke louder than anything else. Zeus nudged Leo's arm gently, his tail brushing the boy's leg, once a small reassurance. Judge Reeves took off her glasses and set them down carefully on the bench. Her voice was steady, but softer than before. "Thank you, Leo," she said. "You've been very brave." And in that moment, the entire courtroom seemed to breathe again, because a child had spoken, and the truth had finally found its voice. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of the courthouse, chasing away the gray that had hung there for days. The air felt heavy with waiting. Every face turned toward the bench as Judge Margaret Reeves lifted the verdict sheet. Her silver hair glowed faintly in the light. Her voice was steady, carrying across the room like a slow drum beat. "Full custody is granted to Officer Alexander Sullivan. A permanent restraining order is issued against Brenda Sullivan." The words struck the air like thunder. For a moment, no one moved. Then the sound of soft gasps filled the room. Whispers, shuffles, the kind of quiet noise that comes after something final. At the table, Alex Sullivan closed his eyes, the tension in his shoulders finally giving way. Lisa Park placed a gentle hand on his arm. Across the aisle, Brenda froze, her mouth open, as if the breath had been pulled from her chest. Her lawyer, Thomas Reed, looked down, knowing the fight was over. But the quiet didn't last. The courtroom doors opened again, and two men in dark suits stepped inside. Marcus Hale, from Internal Affairs, led them forward, a new folder in his hand. He spoke clearly for all to hear. "Your Honor, Internal Affairs has concluded its review. A federal warrant has been issued for Brenda Sullivan and Shane Calder, charging them with data breach and obstruction of justice." Gasps turned into murmurs. The news rippled through the courtroom like a shockwave. Two federal agents, Agent Miller and Agent Ruiz, walked straight toward Brenda's table. Mrs. Sullivan, Miller said firmly, "You're under arrest." The color drained from Brenda's face. "No," she whispered, standing quickly. "You can't do this. I was trying to help him." But her voice cracked as Agent Ruiz took her wrists and secured the cuffs. At that moment, the side door opened again. Shane Calder was led in by another officer, his smirk fading the instant his eyes landed on Leo, who sat quietly beside Zeus at the back of the room. Leo flinched slightly, and Alex moved instantly, stepping in front of him, one arm outstretched in silent protection. Zeus stood beside them, fur bristling, a deep growl rumbling from his chest, the Guardian's final warning. Brenda turned, once eyes wide, calling Alex's name through the noise. But he didn't answer. Her screams faded down the hallway as the agents led her away, leaving behind only silence and sunlight, bright, clean, and unbroken. The courthouse was quiet now. The storm had passed. Alex Sullivan stepped outside with Leo and Zeus, the sunlight warm on their faces. For the first time in many weeks, the air smelled clean. No fear, no tension, just the soft hum of the city waking up. Sergeant Linda Hayes waited by her patrol car, a small smile on her face. "You did it, Alex," she said gently. "The department's cleared you. You're reinstated." He nodded, the relief slow but real. "Thank you, Linda." Leo tugged his hand. "Can we go home now?" "Dad?" Alex looked down at his son, at those bright eyes that had seen too much. "Yeah," he said softly. "We can." They drove through the quiet streets of Alder Street windows, down the smell of wet earth and sunlight filling the car. Zeus sat in the back seat, his head near Leo's shoulder, tongue out, happy simply to be near them. When they reached home, the door opened with a familiar creak. The house still carried echoes of the past, but it no longer felt haunted. Alex stood in the living room, sunlight spilling through the curtains, and exhaled deeply. He wasn't a police officer in this moment, just a father rebuilding a life. That night, as Leo fell asleep with Zeus curled beside his bed, Alex whispered to himself, "We're home." The word finally felt true. Spring returned to Seattle with soft rain and new blooms. The days moved slower now, gentler, kinder. Alex spent his mornings making breakfast with Leo and his evenings walking with Zeus through the park. Leo laughed more these days. He drew pictures of the three of them, his father, his dog, and himself, under a bright yellow sun. Each drawing was a small piece of healing color, returning to a life once gray. One night, Leo sat on the couch while Alex gently trimmed his nails. The boy hesitated for a second, then smiled. "I trust you, Dad," he whispered. Alex's eyes stung as he nodded. The simple sound of the nail clipper clicked softly through the room, steady and peaceful, a rhythm of safety. Zeus sighed contentedly by their feet, his tail thumping once. Outside, the rain fell softly against the window. Inside, love had found its home again. The storm was gone. Only peace remained.